Across the ancient world, armies feared steel, arrows, hunger, and disease. Yet none of these terrors could match the quiet horror that swept through foreign soldiers when they saw a wounded Spartan rise to his feet after drinking something so foul, so thick, and so utterly revolting that even the bravest men gagged at the smell. Other armies carried salves, poultices, ointments, and fragile vials of precious herbs. The Spartans carried discipline, fire, and a crude dark mixture they called the blood broth of strength, a drink so disgusting that only those raised in the harshest conditions could swallow it without collapsing from nausea alone. To understand why the Spartans created such a brew, you must remember one thing. In their world, recovery was not a gentle process, guided by healers with soft hands. It was a battlefield of its own, and the enemy was death. A warrior who needed days of rest after an injury was a liability to his brothers. A soldier who relied on others to mend him was considered unfinished, incomplete, a vessel not yet hardened by the forge of Sparta. And so, from childhood, the Spartans were taught a single truth. If something strengthens you, you endure it, no matter how disgusting, painful, or unnatural it feels. This belief was what gave birth to the drink. Not in temples, not in the halls of philosophers, but in the dirt, during long campaigns far from home, when wounds bled, infections began, and sleep offered no comfort. The Spartans needed something fast, something that shocked the body into awakening its deepest reserves, something that flooded the mind with clarity and the flesh with a violent burst of strength. And so they created the brew. There was nothing elegant about its preparation. No rituals, no prayers, no careful measurements. The drink was assembled in minutes, always with the same 3 ingredients. Whatever blood could be taken from freshly butchered animals, whatever bitter plants grew nearby, and whatever wine had turned too sour for ordinary men to swallow. Mixed together, these components produced a smell that struck the senses like a blast of rot and vinegar, a thick, metallic stench that clung to the air and made even hardened warriors grimace involuntarily. But grimacing was allowed, what came next was not. According to ancient accounts whispered across Greece, the first time a Spartan boy encountered this brew was during the agoge, long before he ever tasted true battle. To test his discipline, the instructors prepared a diluted version of the drink, letting the boys see the reddish-brown liquid settle into a wooden bowl with an oily film on top. They described the smell as a mixture of rust, decayed leaves, and fermented wine, each inhalation burning as if the nose itself were rejecting the presence of something unclean. Yet the boys, trembling with the heavy awareness that refusal meant humiliation, raised the bowls to their lips. The first sip was always the worst. Thick, warm, aggressive. The blood gave the mixture a dense texture that coated the tongue unpleasantly, turning each swallow into a battle between instinct and will. The herbs added a bitterness that numbed the mouth, making it feel as if the tongue had been dipped into acid. The sour wine burned the throat, sending a shockwave down the chest and into the stomach. Many boys gagged, their faces contorting violently as the flavor clawed its way through their senses. But a true Spartan learned to master that reaction to swallow pain, disgust, and fear with the same calm determination with which he would later swallow the reality of war. This was no ordinary test. The instructors watched not for strength, but for discipline, for the ability to override instinct and command one's body. A Spartan who could force this brew down without flinching would someday be able to force himself to rise after being struck, stabbed, cut, or burned. The drink was not simply medicine, it was training for the will. But the true purpose of the brew revealed itself on campaign. When a warrior took a wound, a deep cut along the ribs, a gash across the thigh, a slash on the forearm, the immediate goal was not to heal the injury perfectly, but to ensure that the warrior remained functional. They pressed hot metal to stop the bleeding, packed wounds with crushed herbs to numb the pain, and tightened leather bindings until the flesh swelled around them. Yet even after these treatments, the warrior often felt weak, dizzy, or fatigue symptoms that meant danger in the middle of a march or battle. That was when the commander ordered the brew. With practiced hands, a younger Spartan or a helot assistant would gather what was needed. The blood still warm, still steaming lightly in the morning air, bitter leaves torn from nearby shrubs, and a skin of wine so sharp it smelled like burning. These ingredients were thrown into a pot, stirred quickly until they merged into something thick, dark, and violently unappetizing. When poured into a wooden cup, the mixture oozed slowly, leaving streaks of red and brown clinging to the sides like the marks of some primordial creature. The wounded warrior did not have time to prepare himself. He was handed the cup and told simply, "Drink it." And he did, because hesitation meant weakness, and weakness meant death. The effect was immediate. The bitterness of the herbs shocked the senses awake, forcing the body to produce saliva, forcing the lungs to expand sharply. The sour wine ignited the stomach, sending a burning rush through the veins that felt like fire spreading from the inside out. And the blood, rich in iron and dense in texture, created a momentary surge of raw energy, not magic, not fantasy, but the simple, undeniable effect of protein and heat hitting a body desperate for fuel. But the drink's power did not come from its ingredients alone. It came from the act of swallowing something repulsive, something the body rejected instinctively, something that required total command over one's own flesh. It was this act, this domination of instinct, that sharpened the Spartan's focus, that reawakened his will, that reminded him that pain, sickness, and exhaustion were just distractions to be conquered. This disgusting brew became a symbol of the Spartan truth that the path to strength was paved with discomfort, and that recovery was not a gentle return to health, but a violent refusal to remain weak. And while other armies sought rest, herbs, and careful healing, the Spartans drank the revolting mixture, tightened their armor, and returned to formation, because in their world, the battle never paused simply because the body complained. The truth is that the drink did not remain a simple test from the agoge. It evolved into a battlefield tool designed to keep warriors alive long enough to strike back. When the Spartans marched far from home, crossing mountains, plains, and burning stretches of Greek summer, they often lacked the luxury of healers, herbs, or rest. And because their survival depended on endurance rather than comfort, the drink took on a new form, thicker, stronger, and more revolting than anything a young recruit had ever tasted in training. It usually began after a skirmish, when the dust settled and the cries of the wounded faded into a low, painful murmur. While other armies waited for healers or allowed men time to breathe, the Spartans acted immediately, gathering around their injured like craftsmen, preparing to mend a broken shield. They believed that wounds must be confronted before they soften the will, and so even moments after an injury, a wounded warrior found himself surrounded by disciplined hands, working quickly and with brutal efficiency. The first step was always to stop the bleeding. The Spartans carried metal pins and small iron plates heated in fire, and they pressed these directly onto the wound with a calmness that shocked enemy observers. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air, rising in thin wisps of smoke that curled around the warrior's face as his jaw locked shut from the pain. But he did not cry out. He had been trained since childhood to swallow agony silently. Only after the bleeding stopped did the preparation of the drink begin. It was never the same mixture twice, because the Spartans relied entirely on whatever materials the land provided. If they had hunted recently, the blood of goats, pigs, or wild deer was used warm, heavy, and steaming slightly when poured. If no fresh kill was available, they turned to stored skins of darkened, thickened blood mixed with wine to prevent clotting, an even more nauseating version of the brew. The scent alone was enough to make the stomach twist, strong, metallic, almost sweet in its decay. Next came the plants. Spartan scouts were trained to identify the bitter herbs that grew in dry soil, plants that tasted so sharp and aggressive that they numbed the tongue within seconds. These herbs were crushed between stones until they formed a paste that released an aroma like crushed pine needles mixed with acid. Some of the plants were mildly antiseptic, others energized the body, and a few were so bitter that soldiers joked they could wake a dead man if placed under his nose. Finally came the wine, not the pleasant aromatic wine served in symposia, but the harsh, sour remains that other Greeks would have thrown away in disgust. This wine had turned sharp with time, burning like fire when swallowed, its acidity powerful enough to sting open cuts on the lips. All of these ingredients were thrown into a pot or bowl and stirred together with something that looked more like a weapon than a cooking tool, a thick stick, blackened at one end from fire and stained dark from years of use. The mixture thickened quickly, leaving behind swirling patterns of red, brown, and black that clung to the sides of the container like tar. When the Spartans lifted the pot, the liquid moved slowly, as if resisting the pull of gravity itself. This was no comforting medicine. This was a challenge, a command, a test of the warrior's very soul. The wounded Spartan never asked what was inside. It did not matter. The moment the cup reached his hand, he knew exactly what he was expected to do, because every fiber of his upbringing had trained him for this moment. He was not allowed to sniff it or hesitate. Hesitation was failure. A Spartan drank it the way he charged into battle, with complete acceptance of whatever came next. The first swallow was a shock to the system. The bitterness of the herbs surged across the tongue like a wave of fire. The thick, metallic flavor of the blood coated the mouth, leaving a heavy, warm sensation that made even seasoned warriors clench their fists involuntarily. The sour wine ripped through the throat, forcing the lungs to expand sharply as the body reacted with a deep, involuntary gasp. Some men coughed, others trembled. A few felt tears gather at the corners of their eyes despite their best efforts to suppress them. But they all continued drinking because stopping halfway was unacceptable. What made the drink so effective was not some magical healing property, but the violent reaction it triggered in the body. The herb stimulated the salivary glands and lungs, clearing the mind in an instant. The wine's acidity forced the stomach to contract, speeding digestion and flooding the bloodstream with whatever nutrients the blood provided. And the blood rich in iron, salts, and protein offered quick, dense fuel that the body absorbed rapidly during moments of extreme stress. But even more important than the physical effects was the psychological transformation it unleashed. The moment a warrior swallowed the last mouthful, he experienced a surge of energy that felt almost unnatural, a mixture of adrenaline, determination, and controlled fury. The drink shocked the system so violently that the mind reawakened, snapping back from the threat of collapse. Many described feeling a pounding in their chest, a heat that spread across their muscles, and a sudden clarity that cut through pain like a blade. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't pleasant, it was survival. After drinking it, the warrior often stood up faster than anyone expected. He tightened the leather straps around his cauterized wound, lifted his shield, and returned to formation, driven not by comfort or relief, but by the knowledge that no Spartan ever allowed injury to dictate his fate. And although the pain never vanished completely, the brew allowed him to move, to think, and to fight long enough for the battle to be won. Those who witnessed Spartans drinking this brew for the first time swore they saw something almost supernatural, wounded men rising with fire in their eyes, refusing rest or mercy, advancing as if fueled by rage alone. But the truth was far simpler. The Spartans had mastered not only the art of combat, but the art of commanding their own bodies, forcing them to obey even when logic demanded surrender. This drink, as disgusting as it was, symbolized everything that made Sparta feared across the ancient world. It was a reminder that their strength did not come from comfort, rituals, or sophisticated medicine, but from the brutal belief that the body must serve the will, not the other way around. And yet, the most disturbing part of this ritual was not the drink itself. It was what came after, when the Spartans tested whether the brew had truly worked, a test that pushed the wounded far beyond mere endurance, and into a realm few other soldiers dared to enter. Even though the drink was violent, bitter, and revolting enough to make even the toughest stomach clench, the Spartans believed that swallowing it was only the first step in proving that a warrior was still worthy of standing among his brothers. What followed was a second ordeal, a test that determined whether the wounded man would return to the phalanx or remain behind, surrounded by the shame of watching others fight in his place. This test was not written in any scroll or carved into temple stone. It was a tradition carried through generations, whispered from veteran to recruit. After a Spartan drank the brew, the commander watched him with an expression that showed neither sympathy nor expectation. The warrior's hands trembled. The herbs numbed his lips and throat. The wine burned his stomach like a swallowed flame, and the thick blood left a warmth in his chest unlike anything he had felt before. But these sensations meant nothing unless the man could stand, move, and prove that he still belonged in the line. So the commander issued a simple order, not a question, not a suggestion, but a command that echoed the core of Spartan identity: rise. And rise he did, sometimes slowly, with a deep exhale through clenched teeth, sometimes sharply, almost defiantly, as if the drink had ignited something primal inside him. The other warriors watched, not with pity, but with the silent respect given to those who willingly accepted suffering without complaint. The wounded man tightened the straps of his armor, readjusted his spear, and lifted his shield, even if the movement reopened the edges of his wound or sent a new surge of pain along his ribs. Only when he could hold his shield steady without letting it drop, only when he could plant his feet firmly into the earth without swaying, did the test continue. The commander would step forward, his spear held loosely in his hand, and strike the wounded man's shield not hard enough to cause collapse, but with enough force to test balance, reflex, and determination. The shield vibrated violently upon impact. The wounded Spartan absorbed the shock through his legs, shoulders, and core, refusing to flinch, refusing to step back. This was the moment every man feared, because failure meant not injury, but shame. If he dropped his shield, if he stepped back, if he winced visibly, he was pulled from the formation and forced to sit among the unfit, a position that cut deeper than any blade. But if he held the line, even with blood trickling from fresh bandages, he was declared ready, capable, and worthy once more. And so the Spartans created a ritual that transformed wounds into fuel, pain into discipline, suffering into pride. The brew was not meant to heal perfectly. It was meant to tear away hesitation, to awaken the spirit, to force the warrior to confront the limits of his own body and push beyond them. No other army dared to imitate such a practice, not because they lacked the ingredients, but because they lacked the philosophy, the belief that the body exists to serve the will, and the will must remain unbroken, no matter how the flesh suffers. After the test, there was no celebration. The Spartans marched forward as if nothing had happened. The injured warrior returned to his position in the phalanx, surrounded by men who expected him to fight, to hold the shield wall, and to advance without hesitation. It did not matter if his cut reopened or if the herbs made his vision blur at the edges. What mattered was that he moved with them, breathed with them, and stood with them. And when battle resumed, the effect of the brew became unmistakable. The wounded Spartan fought with a ferocity that shocked enemy soldiers, who expected him to collapse after the first clash. Instead, he advanced like a man possessed, not stronger, not faster, but more determined than anyone else on the field. The pain sharpened his focus rather than dulling it, reminding him with every heartbeat that he had something to prove, not to his enemies, but to the brothers who fought at his side. Reports from ancient historians describe scenes in which Spartans fought with bandages darkened by fresh blood, their movements precise, disciplined, and unyielding. Enemies whispered that the Spartans drank some kind of magical potion, something that transformed weakness into strength. But the truth was far simpler. The potion did not change the body, it changed the mind. It reminded the warrior that he was not allowed to surrender to injury. He was expected to command his flesh the same way he commanded his spear. When the battle finally ended and the field grew quiet under the fading light, the Spartans did not lie down or collapse. They inspected their wounds, tightened their bandages, and swallowed whatever bitterness remained in their mouths. They carried the disgusting taste like a symbol of their survival, a reminder that every scar carried a story, and every drop of the brew was a vow to rise again. This drink, foul and primitive, became one of the many reasons foreign armies feared the Spartans. It represented something their enemies could not understand, a worldview where comfort was an enemy, where pain was a teacher, and where recovery was not a gentle return to health, but a brutal reaffirmation of discipline. Long after Sparta disappeared, long after its warriors marched their final campaigns, the legend of the drink endured. Historians argued about its ingredients, philosophers debated its symbolism, and storytellers exaggerated its effects. But all of them agreed on one thing. The Spartans recovered not because their medicine was powerful, but because their spirit was. They drank what others would vomit, stood when others would fall, fought when others would retreat, and lived according to a truth that has survived for thousands of years. Strength does not come from what you swallow. Strength comes from what you refuse to spit out.